Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. This is a 25-year look across the autism spectrum, led by myself, Kelly Birmingham. I am a BCBA, and I'm been a BCBA nearly 20 years now. And as always, I'm with my partner in crime, Jen Lucero, mother to Dylan and Ethan. Hi, Jen.
Hey, good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. So we have a heavy topic today. Whew. Our podcast is designed to go through topics related to autism and family systems and autism from a parent perspective and a BCBA perspective, hoping to sort of bridge the gap across with those two groups. I know that as a BCBA, I've learned a lot in my 25 plus year career. Things I'd never learned in school in my program about understanding a parent perspective. And I always say you don't have to be a parent to be a good BCBA, but you do have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of a family raising a child with autism to be the best kind of BCBA. So we have a wonderful guest today, Jen. We have Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Hi. Kelly, I met you on LinkedIn and through our mutual good friend, Mandy Ralston, who everyone in the world knows and loves. And Kelly, you are a mom to 3 children and a fierce advocate in Louisville, Kentucky, in the autism spectrum world. Will you take like 2 minutes and tell our audience about who you are?
Sure. I'm the parent of 3 kids, like you said, 2 boys on the spectrum. My 20-year-old, my oldest son, is nonverbal, more profoundly autistic, very dependent on 24/7 supervision and care. He can't communicate any of his feelings or basic needs. And his only means to communicate is really his body language or meltdowns. And he can become very violent when he's upset, but he can also be a super sweet, really calm, laid back person. His biggest trigger in our household is my 11-year-old son, who is also on the spectrum, but another side of it. He's verbal, he's loud, he's aggressive, he has, OCD, ADHD, pathological demand avoidance. He has to control his environment, or he has, raging meltdowns, which is a catalyst for my older son to have his meltdowns. So, in a nutshell, they have been, the focus of my life for about 13, 14 years now. I used to work in behavioral health. I've been a social worker. I have a background in insurance, both claims and, prior auths, things like that. But I've been homeschooling my oldest since 2009, and then homeschooling my youngest now because neither really could thrive in the school environment, either private or public, just due to one needing to withdraw and become overwhelmed, and the other one needing to just take over and control the environment and getting fixated and perseverating on things that had nothing to do with learning. So they've been homeschooled and in behavior therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, special diets, on meds, off meds, jumping through the groups, the paperwork, the therapies. That's kind of been life for a long time now. So I do try to spend some time feeling like I'm being proactive by advocating where I can. I recently just joined a task force here in Louisville of parents who are trying to create more housing options here in the state of Kentucky. Just at the very beginning of our brainstorming meetings of what we need to do next. But, that's giving me hope for the future.
That's
that
great.
My boys someday have a safe, enriching place to live when I'm no longer to do all this. So that is our life in a nutshell.
Well, we are so glad to have you because you are a force of nature, clearly, and you have a perspective with 3 children, right? Jen has Dylan and Ethan. And so we're going to I'm going to be referencing today the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, right? And I'm talking about grief because I'm going to talk about grief and guilt, right? Raising a child on the autism spectrum. Now, it doesn't mean every family goes through this, but research indicates that a lot of families, upon receiving a diagnosis of autism, go through these stages of grief. And the stages are 1, denial, 2, anger, 3, bargaining, 4, depression, and 5, acceptance. Okay, so let's talk about real quick, and we're going to try to do this in a short podcast. We'll probably have to, go back through and talk about it, but let's talk about Jen, I'll ask you first, and then Kelly.
Okay.
Get your child gets a diagnosis of autism. Anger, guilt, where you at?
At first, I think for me, it was, um, I don't know if it was anger or guilt. It definitely was grief.
Yep.
I think I knew for about 2 years, and I was trying to get a diagnosis and I couldn't. And then luckily we found the right person, and we had started therapy already. But there was, I guess, a little bit of guilt that I couldn't get him diagnosed for 2 years when I was pursuing it.
Yep.
But it's come a long way. I remember, even though I knew he was hearing it, and hearing it is so profound. It was like, scraping me up off the floor, and I felt like I got hit in the head with a shovel, and I had like this flash of like, what is his life and my life, and my other son's life going to be like forever moving forward. So that was my immediate reaction.
I think you called me right after that. That's how I
Yes.
met you. Kelly? I mean, you went through it twice.
Yeah, we had a similar situation with our first, my oldest. We knew he had autism long before we actually got a diagnosis. In the meantime, we had a pediatrician literally say, he doesn't strike me as an autistic child. And we had a speech therapist say that's not autism, because he had waved bye to her. So you were being misled. And I always tell people, have got to trust your gut. Trust your gut. When something's not right with your child. And this goes on until they're adults, like ours are now. But the initial feeling of the diagnosis is definitely, I think it's kind of a disbelief type of sadness. And there's something people don't really talk about much, I think, in this realm, is that when your child is diagnosed with something like this, it feels like a life sentence.
Mhm.
There's no cure, and they're going to probably need you the rest of your life. And it isn't just their life that has been impacted, but you instantly know my life is forever changed.
Mhm.
And it isn't like, and I don't mean to discredit, I always hesitate to go down this path of thought, because I don't want to insult anyone. But if you hear that your child has been, maybe they're blind or they're deaf or something, you feel like there's stuff that can be done. It's awful, it's tragic, but you feel like there's stuff to be done. When you're diagnosed with autism, there's nothing, there's no answers. It's incurable. Best of luck to you. There's no one set of, well, just follow A, B, C, and X, Y, Z, and your child will be talking by the age of 5, or they'll be living independently when they're 18. There's no answers, and there's nothing to cling to. It's a very lost feeling of, it's a different type of grief, because you also feel so helpless. And, it's not a terminal diagnosis, like those battling terminal diseases. It's a different type of grief. It's a very unsettling, scary path, because you have no idea where you're going, but you have this desperate feeling to do something. I got to get started doing something to help them. What is that? It's so many people in the chat rooms and Facebook, they're like, we were diagnosed this week. What do I do? And you feel almost an anxiety of, I don't even know what to tell them, because each child is so different. You're just going to dive in, and you're trying a gluten-free diet. You're trying all these supplements. You're reaching out for therapists, and they say you need 40 hours a week of behavior therapy. And you're like, well, how do we afford that? And you're just overwhelmed. So you're dealing with this grief, but also this extreme panic and overwhelmed feeling. I think that it subsides once you just kind of, like any anxiety, if you just get started doing something, get some answers, get some guidance from other parents, talk to other people in the same boat, so you realize you're not alone. Helps manage that grief and that panic. And then once you kind of get started on the path of doing something, you start to feel a little better, and acceptance starts to come with time. But it just takes time. Like any grieving process, it takes time. And you keep yourself active during the grieving process, the acceptance will come later. There's always the underlying sadness that you can't change it. By the time my oldest son was about 9.5, almost 10, when my second son came along, And there definitely was a second layer of like, surely this can't happen twice. There's no way.
Wow.
The denial was really big, I think, the second
Yep.
time around. This can't happen twice. And talk about guilt. You know, there's all kinds of guilt. That's definitely another whole nother conversation to have someday. Um, I
Wait,
think,
hold on for a second. Guilt because you had a second child on the autism spectrum?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's when I'd already had a second child. I had my daughter. She's perfectly fine. She was like,
Mhm.
she's my easy kid. She's amazing. You know, she's perfectly normal, healthy, happy. Um, and then when my third child came along, when we found out it was a boy,
Uh-huh.
you're already concerned.
Yep.
Mhm.
Percentages just went up, but surely that won't happen again.
Mhm.
But then you're like, he came along, he's healthy, he's a strong, healthy little baby boy. But man, we were like watching him like with a microscope,
Yeah.
through his entire development. And I think when he was in his bouncy seat at about maybe, I'm gonna say 7, 8 months old, and he was bouncing and kicking his legs in his bouncy seat. Well, that's just what babies do, right? But my husband and I were both like, is he stimming? Off like
Mhm.
is that autism? Right now we're looking for it,
Yeah.
But sure enough, he didn't develop gestures, he didn't develop speech when he should. He was delayed. He did develop it. He's more high functioning cognitively and communicative than my older son, but it was there and we saw it very early on. And again, trusted our gut, and we're on the phone getting resources started as soon as we could, even before we had a true diagnosis.
Mhm.
But definitely went through the kind of the grieving process again.
Yeah.
And whenever I focus on, feeling sad, I try to just take that step back and look at the big picture of our lives and their functionality, the things they can do, the things we've been able to do and provide, and their physical abilities. They both have great physical abilities and coordination and love sports and can do things like that within the realm of Special Olympics and special teams that can
Nice.
accommodate their anxiety and, craziness sometimes. But definitely felt grief, with the initial diagnosis of both, and definitely went through the cycle that you've talked about.
Yeah. You know,
Hopefully acceptance.
yeah, it's interesting from I've been doing this 27 years now, right? And so what I encounter, and so if you look at the psychology of this, in psychology, they say the best thing to do is like you described, Kelly, is give families information in the beginning. Like when they're in the denial, anger, guilt, bargaining stage, information is what you give. And then you move into a supportive model, and then you give into now we're guiding. But when autism happens, so that's that's death, grief, right? In autism, parents have to go through that cycle really fast to acceptance, because now we're moving on to treatment, right? So I don't feel like families always process that cycle to the way psychologists would tell people to.
Mhm.
And so now I'm a BCBA. I can remember being a young BCBA and blowing this. And by young, I don't mean age, I mean inexperienced. And so I'm coming in, I'm working with families, and I can tell they haven't fully gone through this cycle because there's no time, right? You've got to get right to the now we're doing treatment. And I've personally found this path that's happened. And I read it in the literature when I was prepping for today's podcast, is that there are families sort of go through, like I see sort of like 3 branches that families go through. And some of it does seem related to culture and socioeconomic status, sadly. But what I see is there's a group of families that start to pamper and baby their child on the spectrum, right? I see that in a lot of Latino families, that they feel badly that they have a child. And so they make sure that child is happy no matter what, right? And that can result in some of those kids have minimal expectations and not making the kind of progress they potentially could. I'm not saying all families do that, but that's one path. Then I see a path that of families that in the beginning, and you both, I don't know if you both did this, Jen, I know you did it, are all in everything. Like, I joke around and say like balls to the walls, like going in, doing everything you can, right? And then I see a middle path where the parents can't agree on the diagnosis and what to do. And it takes a while to get on the right path because And that's what, unfortunately, what happened with my husband. He and his wife, Melanie's mom, didn't agree even that there was a diagnosis and or how to proceed, and it resulted in divorce, right? So there, I see those three paths happen a lot as a BCBA. So I'm trying to navigate those paths with the family. And so, Jen, I'll go to you first. You were balls to the walls, and two of you that didn't agree resulted
Yeah,
in
it's like
divorce.
I think I was hit two categories.
Exactly. And I'd see that actually sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, I think because like you said, Kelly, I was so like, even though I knew, I was still so floored and bummed out, and it was hard. I had a baby too, you know, like
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember the day I met Kelly, Birmingham, I walked in her office and, I had Dylan was he was still only 4, right? And I had a
He's gonna be 23 tomorrow. Holy shit.
yeah, I had a 2-year-old, and then I had a pug, and I went in her office and like Dylan just like tore her office apart. And I just
Brand new
like
room. He destroyed
I
it.
was like, help me, but yeah, I mean, honestly, I knew nothing about autism until, Dylan got diagnosed. But I just was like, and I think people get better, and I don't think they mean it the way it comes out. And again, I think Kelly, you and I were the same time frame, it seems like, even though Dylan's a couple of years older, but at that time, like it is like a, I don't know, life sentence, because they're watching my kid briefly and they're like, your kid's never gonna, like it was more of a list of everything Dylan was never gonna be able to do, and like, so it was just like, oh my gosh. But I'm hardcore, just personality wise. And so I was like, I see something in Dylan. Like I always have, and I've always fought for Dylan. Like he wasn't verbal for a very long time. He is, limitedly verbal now. He definitely tells you what he wants and doesn't want. But I wasn't gonna accept, like, he is never gonna go to school, and he's never gonna, the huge hit list of what he wasn't gonna do. And I was like, well, maybe he's not gonna do it in the, traditional way that, society thinks, but I see something in him. I'm not gonna just throw in the towel or hide out either. That was a big thing for me in the beginning, having another kid. And I started to just read everything I could, learn everything I could. I was like you too, like, even though it was overwhelming at the time, there weren't like centers where you could
Mhm.
one-stop shop. And like I was driving all over the place all day long to either medical appointments or, services. Same thing, Dylan's had every, service you can think of, learning at the time what worked, what didn't work. But and honestly, it totally changed my professional career path too. I was a designer for Disney. And now, I ended up, I got, people thought I was really good with people with autism and behavior. So I worked for the school district for many years, and with, kids with moderate to severe autism. And now I've been in a nonprofit world for like 15 years. And I actually am a director for Special Olympics. So I'm excited to hear your kids benefit from it. But like, even though it sucks and it still sucks, there's days that I do feel depressed. I also feel like through this journey of autism and all the bad stuff, like it's also actually enriched my life and brought people into my life that have become, close family and friends, and we're like a tribe, and we have to advocate for our kids, because if we don't, like, everybody's going to slip through the cracks.
Yeah, for sure.
So those paths I described, I see neither of you strike me as families that pamper and baby your children, but I see it often.
Mhm.
And maybe Kelly, are you? Talk to me about it.
Well, I would say I can hear myself, both ways. And I
Yep.
think it comes comes honestly day to day based on my energy level, and there's
Mhm.
days when I am just gung ho and
Good
you're ready to
point.
go to the world. And then there's days when it's been rough lately and
Yeah.
I just want them to be happy. The bottom line is we want their lives to be calm, happy, enriched, and to see their faces happy is the number one thing. And I think that comes down to you when you first reached out to me about this topic about caregiver guilt, like sometimes you
Mhm.
give in and you feel guilty that maybe we let the behavioral goals slide a little just because he's happy right now. And it's easy to do because every parent wants to see their child happy, and ours that are constantly struggling.
Yeah.
And so many days the world just doesn't seem to let them fit into it very well. If they have a moment of joy, you're just like, to heck with the behavioral goals right now, the data. I don't care. He's so happy right now. And in fact, not too long ago, right after Halloween, my youngest, who's 11, he had gone trick or treating. He had a little bag of candy. I'd purposefully given him a small bag so he wouldn't come home with copious amounts of candy. But we had an evening where he wasn't raging. He wasn't, hyper fixated on things. He was pretty calm. And he had gotten a Nestle Crunch, a little one, out of his bag. And my husband and I are sitting on the couch in the family room, and we look over and he has climbed up on the kitchen table, standing on it, and he's touching his Nestle Crunch bar to the ceiling before he eats it. And he's looking at it and he's doing this. It's weird, right? I don't know why.
No, it's not like it doesn't faze me.
And I'm like, and my husband and I literally kind of looked at each other and looked at him and just kind of went back to what we were doing. And I was telling my daughter this story later, and she was laughing because she gets it. It
Yeah.
was like, we're in a happy moment. It's been so peaceful this evening. Who cares? It's weird here. That's our motto. It's weird here sometimes, and, note to self, disinfect the table later. Who cares?
I think sometimes it's pick and choose your battles.
Like 12 or 15 years ago, I might have felt guilty for that moment. Like, I need to teach him. This is a teachable moment. We need to work on, learning about hygiene or boundaries. He might do this at somebody else's house. I need to teach him not to. And now, with 3 years of experience and picking your battles, like, you know what, who cares? It doesn't matter. And I am allowed to have these moments of not feeling guilty and just letting him be peaceful, happy. During meltdowns, how many times, if we're addressing, BCBAs and knowledge and awareness, if a parent is describing a meltdown or a rough moment we had, we had one at Chuck E. Cheese yesterday where my youngest was screaming at another child, a toddler, for not throwing the skee ball hard enough, in those moments, I'm talking about it. And a BCBA says, well, did you take data? Did you count how many times? It's like, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. I respect your job and what you're trying to do.
That's
And
not the time.
it's data driven, but I survived it. We had screaming meltdowns the rest of the evening. I was depleted. I'm going on 4 hours of sleep because he's been up for 30 hours. No, I didn't take data for you. I'm sorry. And I think I'm being a little, ridiculous. Most BCPAs are human beings and they're empathetic. But I think just the question that comes out sometimes is a slap in the face. Really asking me if I took notes, or sat down later and journaled about it and told you how many times he screamed or how many times he hit, to see if we're working towards that goal. We can figure that out. We can estimate it later if you really need the data. But don't come at me with questions like that when we're surviving the day. And I think that, again, I'll pull another little guilt. I think, years ago when I was new to behavior therapy with my oldest son, I would feel guilty, like, oh, I'm a terrible parent. I'm not, taking the data. I was terrible at paying attention to we had a verbal behavior plan in place for my oldest son while my youngest was still an infant. And our therapist was in the house trying to teach me how to show him the cards and get him to say the words, and I was like barely focused. And I felt like, really, I can't do that. I'm changing diapers, and my oldest had regressed and was, having bowel movements in his pants too. And I had actually at this time was caring for both of my aging parents. I was like, are you kidding me? I can't do your verbal behavior plan and take data. No, I just can't. But I had guilt about that. Now I think I'm a little more realistic and I understand, boundaries. That's, our new favorite mental health word now, boundaries, but it's so true. And I think special needs parents can, take a lesson in that. Just be honest and tell people what you're capable of. And if you're not capable of, and the best thing a BCBA could do for a parent would say, I understand this is too much to ask. Let's come up with another method. Or maybe you can just, we'll talk about it the next time we meet, and we'll just kind of come up with an estimate, of how many times this behavior occurred, that happened, and just be willing to understand the situation. Because there are times as a parent when you're talking to a therapist, whether it's a speech therapist, occupational behavior therapist, you can tell they're very knowledgeable and you really respect their knowledge and their fresh ideas, but you can tell they don't live it, or they wouldn't ask you to sit down at 8 o'clock at night and fill out this data sheet. It's like, I know you don't live with it, and maybe you're not even a parent to know that what parent life is like. To just be mindful of that would be so helpful and so beneficial, and it would really help build rapport with your family. And when you get trust from a parent, and a parent feels like they understand, she won't ask me to do too much, she's here to help me, not give me more work. She's not here to give me something else to cope with and absorb and feel bad about if I don't do it, like homework. She's here to help our family, help my child, help me get to where we need to be. I think that would be the best takeaway, I could give for therapists along the lines of guilt. Just don't add to parent guilt.
That one was hard for me to learn, actually. When I look back, I think I always came across as empathetic, for sure, Jen. And I think I always came across as like, I understand, but I didn't understand. Like, I kind of understood because I was taught through my psychology courses to understand and empathize. But I realized in my own life, when I started dating my husband now, and he basically said, you're the only person I could marry because you get it, right? And anyone else, he's like, I dated, because they divorced when his daughters were very young. And by the time Bill and I were together, Melanie was, I think, 18 or 19. She's 33 now. But I can remember everything in my mind was a teachable moment. Everything was a teachable moment. And when he wasn't doing it, we'd fight a lot in the beginning, because I'd say, this is a teachable moment. And he taught me to say, like, I don't want to. I just want to enjoy the happiness like you described, Kelly. And that was hard for me to like do that. And we actually ended up coming together on a plan that I've shared with a lot of families, where there were days where, and it was actually more for me, like Sunday became, we called it non-conditional day. And it was like, no matter what happened this day, even if like Melanie did something that I thought was wrong and we need to teach or fix, it didn't happen, because Sunday was just being together day, no matter what. And I have passed that on to a lot of BCBAs and families. And now, years into it, it's much easier for me to let a teachable moment go. And my husband will laugh and say, I can't believe you let that one go right now. And I was like, I'm too tired.
Yeah.
But
you're allowed to break, though. I mean, this is like a job, when you become a special needs parent. I mean, parenting is 24/7. Special needs parenting is now 24/7 with a lot of extra tasks involved, a lot of extra stressors, and it's for life. You're allowed to take a day off of your job. You're encouraged now to take mental health breaks. Treat it like a job and forgive yourself. It's okay if you decide, I just need the day off today from these behavioral goals or the speech therapy goals, or my youngest has pathological demand avoidance. And there are days when you can't tell him to do anything, even the things he wants to do. He wants to go outside and play, but if I say, let's get your socks and shoes on, no, you can't tell me what to do. 5 minutes later, he'll do it, but it's his decision. I'm not going to make him take a bath that day. You know what? Okay, we'll do that tomorrow. I'm going to pick my battles. I'm allowed to do that for my own mental health, for his health, not to cause him more anxiety to get a task done that isn't pertinent right now or isn't necessary. Becomes, a quick decision to let's let that go today. Let's focus on what matters. And that's giving ourselves a little break from time to time. And maybe it is like your Sundays, maybe let's just take the day off and just let things be, let people be, and not everything has to be therapeutic.
that is hard.
That decision to get to that point, I think, does come with a little bit of experience. Maybe some people are like that right off the bat, when their kid is 3, 4, newly diagnosed. I think it took me a while to get to that point, and I'm even still evolving to that point. With the holidays coming up, that's
Yep.
a big topic for us right now in our house. And my husband and I have laid down some serious boundaries for ourselves because last Christmas was hell.
Mm.
Holidays are not fun usually.
Christmas Eve was hell. We had to leave our Christmas Eve family party because we could see our boys escalating.
Mhm.
This one's tense, and you can just see his body language. The other one's wanting to start to take over and talk and talk and talk, and things are getting out of control. We had to leave, and that vibe and that mood carried over through Christmas Day. And because we forced ourselves to go to a family function that we know can sometimes be overwhelming. And so now the new rules are we go separately. Maybe one of us leaves. We handled Thanksgiving this way. He went early with one kid. I came later. We overlapped a little bit with the ability to leave, so they weren't there together. We actually had a pleasant day, but we both have come to the decision that you can tell when your child's in an escalated phase, when their anxiety's been really bad lately, or maybe if they're a PANS kid, they're flared right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put myself through trying to attend a family function, whatever it may be, just because everyone expects me to be there. I'm comfortable now saying we're not going to attend, And I used to feel like I had to give explanations and explain it. I don't feel that way anymore. I can just say, this is what's best for our family. We send our love. And what I would family and friends could do would just say, okay, well, I hope things are okay.
Yeah.
Stop asking why. Why aren't you there? Why aren't you guys there? Why are you leaving? Because that starts to just add insult to injury. Now it's another thing I kind of feel guilty about. I have to explain it again. I wish that in this moment of duress, they would just give me a hug and say, well, I hope things get better, and I used to feel guilty about saying things like that. Like, I don't want to dump on other people. I don't want to dump our stress on other people. I just want to quietly escape the situation or not attend in the first place. Again, that's a way where you can just, I think, give yourself grace, and you're allowed to make decisions you need to make for your own mental health, for your child's calm and peace. And if there's a situation your child isn't going to thrive in, Chuck E. Cheese yesterday, my little one was asking, and I kind of knew this is going to be bad. Let's try it anyway. It was awful. From now, for the next, few weeks until he settles a little bit, I'll probably just have to stand my ground and say, well, no, we'll go another day. And he'll be upset for a while, but he'll get over it. But I have that mom guilt still sometimes, like, oh, he really wants to go. I hate to say no. We'll just tough it out. I don't have to put that on myself. There are some days I'm resilient. I'm like, sure, let's go. I'll tough it out. If he has a meltdown, so what? There's other days I can't. I'm depleted today. It's been rough lately, or I'm going on 4 hours of sleep like today. And I have the right to say no. And I love how you talked about your Sundays. Your Sunday is a day where we're just going to, exist without it being therapeutic and goal driven. You can decide that spur of the moment. You can wake up on a Tuesday and you had XYZ planned, but it's just not going to happen today. We'll just stay home in the safety of our space and find other activities that are more doable, less anxiety provoking. And it just, you're always kind of in survival mode, and it's like, that's okay.
So as BCBAs, we are not trained about this at all. I hope BCBAs listening to this hear it, because we're trained to not miss a data opportunity, to keep pushing forward, things like give it up for some joy, or, asking a parent to take the data. We're trained like that. And I've had to really pull myself back and say to myself, because we're trained to think, and then our guilt comes in because we're like, I'm not helping this family enough. So if I push harder and push harder, the kids will make the kind of progress I think they can make. And so we live with that guilt of like, am I doing the right thing? And, how do I handle this? And I've left a family's home and thought, oh my gosh, I gave in too. I let them, give in this moment, and should we have done that? And so I think if BCBAs can, if they're listening to this, can just also like have that honest conversation with caregivers and say like, hey, are we on the same page with this? Or how can I, I loved how Kelly, you said, I'm here to help, not give you more work. And have those kinds of conversations, then I think, and be comfortable, both people being comfortable in the space of saying, I thought I was helping, I'm so sorry. And, caregivers saying, we understand we should be doing this too. And, if we just have these conversations, it builds a therapeutic relationship. And we're all working not out of guilt anymore.
It sounds like you're talking about BCBA guilt.
Yeah,
Therapist guilt is not that different from caregiver guilt.
No, it's
And it's
true.
okay. You forgive yourself that you
yeah,
recognize the moment where maybe the parent and child are just having a really great day, and you're like, you know what, just here's your goals to focus on, maybe tomorrow or the next day. But yeah, you don't have to
yeah,
guilt yourself into walking away from a house feeling like you've done something wrong, because you're there to help. And I think most of the time as a caregiver, I'm always so appreciative that our therapists are a part of our lives.
Mhm.
And overall, in the
Okay.
big picture, they are doing great things for us. It's just, there's been moments of frustration. And, with some relationship building, though, when you build trust with a caregiver, a parent, they can tell you that. They can
yeah,
say, "I feel overwhelmed today. I didn't take the data yesterday. I'm sorry." And
Mhm.
they don't feel ashamed. They're okay. They have that honest trust with you. And you're going to definitely, over the long run, have much better results and reach the goals much better for your child, or to be able to set different goals, more achievable goals, because that parent trusts you and they can just open up and be vulnerable. They can,
yeah,
feel brave and be vulnerable, to just bare their soul, and then let you assist if
yeah.
you meet them halfway, if they feel like you'll meet them halfway.
I
Whew,
think,
this was gold. Go ahead, Jen.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's spot on, especially as the kids get older, right? And you've been doing it a long time. I now, with anybody in our lives working with Dylan, like I always front load in the very beginning, whether he's going to his adult day program or his service, or someone's just coming to take him out. And I'll let him know, like, hey, he's been up since 4, or like, he's been sick, or but there's times when like Dylan, trips out or something, and like even afterwards, or they'll call me, and they're like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know, I'm not there. Or just like there's times I don't know. And I think, like, you're right, Kelly, as a parent, it's like there are times when you're just like, I have no idea. And like, I just need to, like, let's like move on.
Yep.
And because think about it, we have, 24 hours in the day, like anything can happen. It can start out great and it can turn on a dime. But I also got to the point where I don't dwell on things, or I
Good
will
point.
go
Mhm.
total mental,
Yep.
because it's just, I'm like go in survival mode of like, I'm just trying to make it through the day,
Yeah.
and tomorrow's another day, and let's start over, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's okay to feel that. It's like any emotion. Feel it,
Mhm.
process it, let it happen. It's
Yep.
okay. It's okay to feel like maybe you just don't have the energy today. It's okay to feel guilty sometimes. So, or okay to feel sad or angry as part of the grieving
Mhm.
process we talked about. And that cycle comes back. Sometimes you have days where you're grieving all over again because something happened that really hit you in the face of all the things they can't do. But if just feel that, and then try to refocus throughout your day on things that your child can do, and the big picture of all the things you've done for them since the beginning, the therapies, jumping through all the hoops of insurance
Mhm.
paperwork, and finding respite, or finding CLS, or finding a BCBA, special diets, all the things we do, from rubbing essential oils on their feet at night to help them, or melatonin, or warm
Mhm.
baths, or
Yep.
taking them to Special Olympics when the days you just didn't feel like it today. There's
Mhm.
so much we do if we just step back and look at that large picture,
Good point.
where they are, and that they're safe, they're fed, their needs are met, they're in a safe, loving environment, and you're always going to advocate for that for them. There's so much to be grateful for if you can just kind of focus beyond guilt or sadness and just get back to that place to move forward. And that's, how you're supposed to process any type of grief or stress or disappointment in life, is just get your big picture, in front of you.
That
And
was
then
perfectly said. Yeah. And I think that I hope BCBAs are listening to this, because we need to hear more of this. Thank you both. This was a phenomenal podcast. I took furious notes because I'm going to try to turn this into training information for BCBAs. So thank you both for sharing your story.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope to chat with you again sometime about other things.
Sounds great. Thank you both.
Thank you.